Hi everyone, thank you for joining the Driving Safely for Longer webinar tonight. We'll just wait one more minute before we start in case people have been delayed. Thank you. Okay, so it's been about a minute, so I'm just going to run you through how you can ask questions throughout the webinar, which we will come to at the end. So as you can see, you should have a control panel, and at the bottom of this control panel, you should see a box. And in this box, you can enter any questions you have throughout the webinar. And as I said before, we'll come back to this at the end. So I'm now going to hand over to Mel and Louise, who are going to introduce Staffordshire Safer Roads Partnership, what they do, and a bit of background behind this webinar. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mel Langdown and I work for the Staffordshire Safer Roads Partnership. So the Safer Roads Partnership includes a number of local public sector organisations who work together to improve road safety in Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent. They include the police, the fire service and Staffordshire Commissioner, plus Staffordshire County and Stoke-on-Trent City Councils and also National Highways. The partnership and our partners deliver a range of activities, including educational campaigns, highway engineering schemes and enforcement. One of the ways we focus activity is based on our priority road users, which you can see here. These are identified if we find that a particular type of road user is disproportionately involved in collisions. We then look at targeting initiatives to try and improve safety for those road user groups. I'll hand over to Louise now to talk about why we've developed the Safe and Sure campaign.
Thank you, Mel. So good evening, everyone. My name's Louise Martin. Hopefully you can see the first slide. Not sure we've got anything on there. There, lovely. Thank you very much. So this is just to add a bit of context, really, as to why we're running the campaign and why we felt it was needed. So if we first look at some of the social factors, we know that there is an increasing proportion of the UK population over the age of 65. So if we a bit more detail, if we go back to 1999, there was 16% of the population of the UK over the age of 65. By 2019, that had risen to 20%. And it's estimated that by 2039, 25% of the UK population will be over 65. We've also got an increasing proportion of the population over 60 with a driving licence. So again, to add a bit more detail to that, there was just a graph to click through, if you could, Mel. Then in the early 1990s, 30% of 70 or above had a licence, but by 2018, this had risen to 67% of that age group. And when we look at the 60 to 69-year-old age group, again, back in the early 90s, 50% of that age group had a driving licence, and yet by 2018, this has increased to 83%. So therefore, mature drivers make up an increasingly large proportion of the driving population. And as a partnership, as we want to do for any demographic of road user, we want to understand needs, meet needs as much as we can, and to keep people driving as safely as possible for as long as possible. If we could move on to the next slide, Mel, that would be great. Thank you. Lovely, thanks. So at the beginning of 2020, we did an analysis of collisions that occurred in Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent that involved mature drivers over the age of 60 plus. And this was very much to help inform the targeting of the campaign and future activities that we might deliver to mature drivers. And from that, we had some interesting findings. There is a slow but increasing trend of collisions involving mature drivers. Not all of those collisions obviously have a mature driver as the blameworthy party. Per 1,000 miles, there's a significant increase in risk of being involved in a collision when a driver is aged over 75 or above. There was very little gender difference. We looked at collisions involving male and female drivers, and there was very little gender difference in the collision risk when you accounted for the number of journeys that were made. So the per journey risk was pretty much equal. When we looked at where collisions were happening, not greatly unexpected, but the highest number of collisions happened where there was the greatest population of people over the age of 60. So we identified those as Stoke-on-Trent, South Staffordshire and Stafford Borough. An interesting made was that there was a link between a higher collision risk for mature drivers in rural areas, and I've just possible reasons for this could be lack of other transport choices and the higher mileage that's often associated with living in more rural areas. Another the analysis was the overrepresentation, so more mature drivers were involved in collisions at junctions such as giveways, junctions with no type of control such as traffic lights, for example, than other ages within the driving population. And then very quickly onto the final slide before I hand over to Rebecca. We looked at other research that was out there, some national research, and a lot of that indicated that amongst mature drivers there was a good level of awareness amongst drivers themselves and their families of how your driving risk alters as you get older. However, there was a relatively low level of understanding of the requirement to renew licences at 70, and even less of an awareness of the availability of driver reviews. There was, however, high levels of self-regulation. So by that I mean that mature drivers tend more than almost any other age group to be able to regulate their own driving. So if there is a situation such as driving in the dark or on certain types of roads or in certain weather conditions that drivers don't feel comfortable, then mature drivers are more likely to avoid that and make those sensible choices. This research really helped us consider what we wanted to address in that campaign. And the other thing that we did was to recruit a small focus group of mature drivers, and they really helped. We worked with them and they helped shape the campaign for us. They shared opinions on materials and what they felt was the suitable approaches. So that hopefully just gives you a little bit of context. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Becky Needham from RoSPA, and she's going to carry on with the rest of the webinar for us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Louise. I'm just going to share my presentation now, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to see my screen. So good evening, everyone. As Louise says, my name's Becky Needham, and I work as a road safety officer at the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, which is a national accident prevention charity. So to tell you a little bit about RoSPA, our vision as a charity is life free from serious accidental injury. And as part of achieving that vision, we offer advice and information to people at home, at work, on the road, and taking part in leisure activities. And I work within the road safety department. So my role is basically to seek out and realise opportunities to reduce the number of collisions on our roads. And what we do is we offer advice to all road users of all ages and different modes. So for example, car drivers and motorcyclists. But one of the key groups that we offer information to is mature drivers and their families. So tonight I'm planning to talk you through some of our key advice for mature drivers and their families, and in particular I'd like to focus on the law on licence renewal, eyesight and driving, medical conditions and how they can affect our driving, driver assessments or reviews, and keeping your car in good condition, and some adaptations that you might be able to make where necessary. And then at the end of my presentation there'll be an opportunity to ask any questions. So as a little bit of background, at RoSPA we recognise that driving a car is a really important part of our personal life, our family life and our work life. And being able to drive a car does offer us that freedom and independence to get about as and when we need to. What we also recognise is that driving can be enjoyable and pleasant, but it also involves a certain amount of risk and it can be stressful at times. So what we find is that experienced drivers in general are much safer than those with less experience, such as younger drivers. But as we get older, our health and fitness, often including our eyesight, our physical health and our reaction times, can begin to decline. And age-related conditions can also begin to affect our driving. But it is important to note that, of course, this is different for each person, and there isn't an age at which we automatically become unsafe to drive. So, as Louise was saying, many drivers will recognise that their driving ability is starting to change, and so they might then change when and where they drive, so avoiding situations that they find stressful, such as driving during the rush hour or at night time. And there are also several simple things that we can do to help us to continue to drive safely for as long as possible, such as taking regular driving assessments and making adaptations to our vehicle. So, of course, one of the key things that we need to be able to drive is valid and up-to-date driving licence. Our driving licences expire when we reach 70 years of age, so when you do reach 70, you'll need to renew your driving licence if you'd like to continue driving, and then you will need to renew it every 3 years afterwards. So as you approach your 70th birthday, the DVLA will send you a reminder and an application form out in the post, and then every 3 years afterwards, when your licence is due for renewal, they'll do the same. And what's really important to remember is that if you don't renew your driving licence, you won't legally be able to drive after your 70th birthday. And if you carry on driving, your driving licence and motor insurance might not be valid, and that would be committing a serious offence. So it's really important to ensure that you renew if you'd like to continue driving. At that stage, you must also tell the DVLA if you develop a condition that might affect your ability to drive safely, or a disability. And you should also let them know if you've got a condition or disability that's got worse since you have got your licence. And that applies to all drivers, no matter what age they are. So when you come up to renewing your licence, there are a number of options. So you can, first of all, you can renew online for free, and that's basically when you reach 70 you can renew online, or you can also renew before you're 70 if your birthday is within 90 days. So if you choose to renew online, you'll be given a user ID code and instructions on how to renew your licence. And one thing that we would point out is that if you are choosing to renew online, it's really important that you make sure that you use the official government website. So RoSPA has been made aware of a number of websites that offer licence renewal at 70 for a fee, and usually that's in exchange for sort of application check-in service. And as far as we know, that fee is non-refundable, so we'd really advise that you check out that you've got the right website before you renew. But the other option is that you can also renew by post if you prefer to. So like I said earlier, the DVLA will send you out a form before your birthday, and if you want to renew by post, what you do is complete that form and then return it to the DVLA. And if you haven't received that form, you can go to the post office and just pick up what's called a D1 form, and then you'd send that off to the DVLA. Usually, in non-COVID times, a postal application would take around 3 weeks, but at the moment, due to the pandemic, we know that this is taking quite a lot longer, and so therefore the DVLA are asking where we can that we renew online. When you complete the form to renew your licence, you'll be asked to declare any medical conditions you have on the form, and then to confirm that you meet the eyesight standards for driving. And of course, it's really important that we answer these questions on the form honestly. It is a serious offence not to declare a condition or a disability that might affect your driving. And if you were involved in a crash, you could be prosecuted and you could also be fined for that. At RoSPA, what we advise is that everyone who's coming up to renew their licence has a medical check. So we would recommend that you do that when you turn 70 and every 3 years afterwards. When you receive your new driving licence, it's really important to check out the details carefully. So when you receive your licence, it might have some codes on the back. So for example, there's a code called 01, and if that's shown on the back of your licence, you would need to wear your prescription glasses or contact lenses every time that you drive. And you should also read any letter or leaflet that comes with your driving licence really carefully. So for example, it might say that you can continue to drive as you did before, or in some instances, it might say that you've been given a temporary driving licence, which you can only use for a driving assessment. And of course, when your licence turns up, please don't forget to dispose of the expired one and keep the new one in a nice, safe place. So alongside a valid driving licence, the second thing that we have to consider is that we're actually fit to drive, and that includes meeting the minimum eyesight standards. So it's really common for our eyesight to get worse as we grow older, and that can just be part of the natural ageing process, or it could be because we develop an eye disease such as cataracts. Some conditions can make it much harder to see as far ahead as we used to be able to, or also to see objects in our peripheral vision. And it can also be difficult to change our kind of visual focus from looking ahead through the windscreen to looking up close at the displays on the dashboard. And what we also recognise is that glare from oncoming headlights can also be a problem at night. So it is really important, pardon the pun, to keep an eye on our eyesight, because poor eyesight can make it really hard to see road signs and markings, other road users, and this can be a particular problem in the dark. And it can also be quite difficult to judge people's speed and distance, and it can slow our reaction time. And obviously, in the worst case, this means that we can either brake or take avoiding action too late, or we might even not see something. So what are the standards we need to meet to drive? The rules are that in good daylight, you have to be able to read a vehicle number plate from a distance of 20 metres. And what we would say is that if you'd like to do your own little number plate test, the best thing to do if you're walking down the street or in a car park is to stand 5 car lengths away and check if you can read the number plate clearly. More technically, you also have to have the adequate field of vision and a visual acuity of 0.5 on the Snellen scale, and that can be with glasses or contact lenses if necessary. If you are told that you do need glasses or contact lenses to drive, it's really important that you wear them at all times while you're driving. And again, it's an offence not to do so, which could invalidate your motor insurance. So what we'd recommend is that you keep a spare set of glasses in your glove compartment. The best way to make sure that you meet the minimum eyesight standard for driving is to make sure that you have an eyesight test at an optician's every 2 years, or more often if the optician advises. And many of you will be aware that you're entitled to a free eye test if you're age 60 or over, or if you have some medical conditions such as diabetes, and you can also receive free eye tests with some social security benefits. So any condition that affects both eyes, except long and short-sightedness or colour blindness, should actually be reported to the DVLA. And it's really important to note that that doesn't mean that you're going to lose your licence or anything like that because you report it. Instead, the DVLA will make an assessment of your eyesight. And if the DVLA do say that you can carry on driving, you could consider taking a driving assessment, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. So coming on to health conditions, there are some really common health conditions such as diabetes, epilepsy, dementia and sleep disorders, which can affect our ability to drive safely. So if you are diagnosed with a health condition, it's really important to check the government website to see if you need to notify the DVLA of your condition. And a full list of the medical conditions that you need to notify the DVLA about can be found on this link on the slide. And the exact rules and advice on what you'll need to do will depend on the nature of the condition that you've been diagnosed with. But what is really important is to seek and follow the advice of the doctor or the optician or the pharmacist, and to comply with any decision that the DVLA makes about your driving licence. So I'm now going to talk through some of the things that we can do to continue driving safely. And what it's important to remember is that everybody's driving changes over time, and that can be in different ways and for different reasons. One of the things that we can consider doing is to consider a driving assessment or a driving review. So a driving assessment helps us to identify how and why our driving is changing and what we can do to help us to continue driving safely for as long as possible. So a driver assessment, and if recommended, some refresher training, will help you to make your driving safer, less stressful and more enjoyable. It can help you to save some money by using less fuel and reducing vehicle wear and tear. And your car might also have a higher resale value and last a little bit longer. You might also be able to receive some insurance discounts from some companies, and at the very least, it will help you to keep your no claims bonus intact. So there are two different types of driver assessments. There's what's known as a detailed assessment and a simple assessment. So if you've been diagnosed with a medical condition or you have a disability that might affect your driving, the best way to go is to take a detailed assessment at a driving mobility centre, and that's rather than the simple assessment. So driving mobility centres have specifically trained clinicians and driving instructors, and they are trained on how to assess how a person's condition or disability might affect their driving and what help might help them to continue to drive safely. And this basically includes a medical assessment, and it's often taken in dual control car, so that's similar to what a learner driver would use in their driving lessons. There are driving mobility centres all over the country. There's over 20. And if you would like one of these assessments, you can self-refer by contacting the centre yourself, or you can follow the recommendation of a clinician, such as your GP. And the cost of the assessment will depend on whether you self-refer or whether you've been signposted by a healthcare professional. But the local centre will be able to advise on that. And then slightly differently, we have simple driving assessments, and those are for people who would just like a little bit of help and advice on how to improve their driving. And there are lots of different organisations that provide these assessments. So there are some such as RoSPA and the IAM that organise assessments all over the country. And then there are also ones with local councils that are run in their own areas. These can be taken at any age. So for example, at RoSPA, we get applications from people who perhaps have been involved in an accident and lost a little bit of confidence, or they might have also gone through a big change in their life, such as having a baby, and just wanted to check where they are with their driving. This type of assessment usually involves going out in your own car and you drive on roads near where you live for about an hour, and you'd have an assessor accompanying you. These are quite informal and they're also confidential, and often you receive a report about your driving and a little bit of advice on how you can make improvements and advice to take further training if necessary. And there are also some assessments that you could take through work. So if you are working, you could also ask your employer if they can arrange an assessment for you. The final thing I'm going to discuss is your car. So it's really important, obviously, to keep your car in a safe, roadworthy and legal condition. So the car must be taxed, it needs to have a valid MOT unless you're lucky enough to have one under 3 years old, and it should be serviced regularly according to the manufacturer's recommendations. But obviously it's also important that you do your regular safety checks to check that nothing's gone wrong in between the services and the MOTs. If you're thinking about changing your car, it's a good opportunity to consider the type of car and any adaptations or accessories that could make your new car more suitable and safer for you to drive. If you do have a medical condition, there's lots of adaptations that can be made for people who might have difficulty operating the controls of the car or even getting in and out of the car. So these include things like steering aids, special cushions and swivel seats to help you get inside and outside of the car, and also hoists to lift you in your wheelchair in if you're using one, and driving accessories. If you'd like any advice on adaptations that you feel you need, we'd again recommend contacting Driving Mobility to find your nearest mobility centre, because you can then go down there and they'll help you decide a suitable vehicle and any adaptations that you might need. It's also worth noting that if you receive certain mobility allowances or supplements, Motability can advise you whether you might be eligible to lease a car at an affordable price through their scheme, and you might also be able to get funding for vehicles and adaptations from charities or other sources. But one thing that's really important to be aware of is that if you do have to make any adaptations to your car, it's really important that you just inform your car insurance company to make them aware, and also if you have to have any sort of special adaptive vehicle controls, you should let the DVLA know too. So I appreciate that's quite a lot of information to digest, so I just wanted to make you aware of our older drivers website, and the link is on screen for you. And this website basically houses all of the information that I've just talked you through, and that website is there to help you to recognise whether and how your driving might be changing, to help you to decide how you can cope with these changes and find help. We've also got a special tool on the website that allows you to find a driving assessment in your area or refresher training for your needs. How to understand all of the legal obligations such as the DVLA rules and procedures, and also to plan for the need to change when and where you drive, and if it becomes necessary to consider other alternatives to driving. And the website also has links to other useful resources and our contact details should you think of any other questions after this evening. So that's it from me. I hope that you found that advice useful, and I'll hand back over to Carmen to take questions.
Thank you for that, Rebecca. So I'll just remind everyone how you can ask questions. So on your screen, you should see a control panel. At the bottom of this control panel, there is a questions box, and if you have any questions, please just enter them here and we'll do our best to answer. So we've had a few questions come in. which I will just read out now. So the first question we've had is from Andy. Can you renew your license at 71 if you forgot to at 70, or do you have to take a test?
I'll answer that one. So you can renew your license at 71. You just need to either apply online or via the post for free at the DVLA. And obviously there would be no test at all to be taken. You just need to complete the usual forms.
Thank you, Rebecca. We've also had a question from Nikki. Do you recommend just getting an assessment every 3 years before you renew your license, or would you recommend to do one every year?
I think it's up to the driver themselves. I think it would be a really great idea to do an assessment each time you come to renew your license, alongside your usual health checks. But if in between those license renewals, if yearly you feel that perhaps your driving's changed or that you've lost a bit of confidence, then it's a really good idea to take stock at that point and get an assessment. So I think it's up to the driver, really.
Thank you, Rebecca. I don't see any other questions, and I appreciate we've run over slightly. So I will draw the webinar to a close. Thank you to everyone who's joined tonight's webinar, and a big thank you to our presenters, Mel, Louise and Rebecca. An online copy of this webinar will be available on Staffordshire County Council's YouTube channel, as well as the Staffordshire Safer Roads Partnership website. So that brings this webinar to a close. Thank you for joining and have a good evening.